Broadly speaking, I'm a big fan of last month's Butterfly Effect Wrestling. The idea that the World Wrestling Federation knew they had no shot at defeating the Panda and allowed the initials for the World Wrestling Federation, the WWF, to go to the World Wildlife Fund, allowing World Championship Wrestling and Extreme Championship Wrestling to win the invasion and subsequently take over the Raw and SmackDown time slots, rebranding Monday to Nitro and Thursday to Hardcore TV. However, for anybody who's familiar with the original slash traditional timeline, there is a very perplexing conundrum that comes up 5 years later. So let's say that WCW and ECW win the invasion in 2001. Let's say everything that we talked about in the last Butterfly Effect video took effect. That WCW and ECW took the spoils of war, that being Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. 5 years on, in the real timeline, is the return of Extreme Championship Wrestling after 2 one-night stands. So you have to ask the question, what would have come from that 1 hour time slot on Sci-Fi Network? So after the open rolls, the one thing that changes 5 years later is it's not the return of Extreme Championship Wrestling, but rather it is the return via a whole different direction. It is the return of Attitude. In 2002, due to the events of 2001, where Vince McMahon, or in storyline, the McMahon family, purchased all of professional wrestling, that being World Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling, and the World Wrestling Federation in and of itself. With this storyline and reality, in 2002, Jeff Jarrett and his father, Jerry Jarrett, launched Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. However, Vince Russo had a different name in mind. So, what Vince Russo, who was a part of the creative team, wanted to call the weekly pay-per-view of TNA was Tuesday Night Attitude, with Vince Russo's concept being that McMahon and co. have lost their attitude, and by being on weekly pay-per-view, they can bring back the thing that had Russo thriving. With that in mind, 5 years after the invasion, or the invaders, succeed, what if, and this is the change one thing after changing a whole bunch of things, but 5 years after we change the one thing of having the invaders win, 5 years later, the company is missing its attitude. And McMahon decides, let's just say, to have a conversation with Vince Russo, and McMahon purchases Total Nonstop Action Wrestling and rebrands it to Tuesday Night Attitude, having a 1 hour from 10 to 11 p.m. show on the Sci-Fi Network where McMahon can push Jeff Hardy, Christian Cage, Kurt Angle, the New Age Outlaws, so many of his talents from the Attitude Era that are actually with at the time of purchase Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, but at the time of after purchase would become Tuesday Night Attitude. And the other thing about picking up the entire roster of TNA and rebranding it is it would actually breathe new life into Hardcore TV and Nitro by reigniting long-term feuds and alliances by bringing the Dudleys from TNA as Team 3D, putting them on Hardcore TV. Raven can be a part of Hardcore TV for the first time in a long time. You could have Kevin Nash and Jeff Jarrett go over to Nitro while figuring out the best way to use the influx of brand new talents that have never been a part of Extreme Championship Wrestling, World Championship Wrestling, but are legitimately talents from Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. And to me, one of the very interesting ways of dealing with it is, like, I think putting AJ on Nitro as a way to prove that he should have been picked up from the start, conceptually, that could work. But a guy like Samoa Joe, man, he works everywhere. Whether it's Extreme Championship Wrestling or being the world-class athlete on Nitro or being a part of the new era of Attitude, if you will, on Tuesday nights. Whatever you want to do with these guys who are unaffiliated with WCW or ECW, you have the option to make them in your own image. But the beauty of having Tuesday Night Attitude is, and I know that this is going to sound crazy as a pitch, but it's a way to make the 1 hour, what once was WWE ECW, but now is Tuesday Night Attitude, fit with the way that it actually played out, which is over the first few, I'm going to say months, I'm going to say less than 6 months after. Because after the first 6 months, they realized, oh, this leaning onto nostalgia and also booking not great television, whether it be the Nacho Man or the zombie character, whatever the case may be. Any of these, like the preacher who is in the crowd saying that, oh, be righteous and not have Tuesday Night Attitude, whatever the case. Because Vince actually was for these bookings, this idea, these things that he executed, and thus I totally see them playing out similarly, probably not identically, but very similarly on the purchased Tuesday Night Attitude. Thank you for being here at Mr. Super Oz. This video is going out, and this channel only exists because I, Oz, founded Gamble Comics, which first release was Everlasting Survivors, a 68-page graphic novel called All Day Long. Available now. Follow the link in the description that will take you to gamblecomics.com. While there, you can get hats, shirts, posters, much, much more. But most importantly, the story itself. And his frustration actually boiling over. And by the new year, Tuesday Night Attitude wouldn't really be the nostalgia show that he wanted it to be. Because, let's be real, while Jeff Hardy, Christian Cage, the New Age Outlaws, and other Attitude Era alumni that were with Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, while they would be cool and interesting to see for a short period of time, much like how ECW was cool to see, whether it be Rob Van Dam or the Sandman, whatever the case is, eventually you do have to focus on what comes next. And so I do believe that even in this timeline where Vince buys out another company, and in this case guts it and makes it his own by rebranding it from Total Nonstop Action to Tuesday Night Attitude, it still would inevitably become the show that you debut new guys on, whether it be a fake accent Jamaican Kofi Kingston or the future Celtic Warrior Sheamus. I totally believe that the 1 hour Tuesday night show would become the place where you find out who the next breakout star is. So much so that Tuesday Night Attitude could become, after a while, TNA Breakout, where you don't have to book it as a reality show, but you can just use it to highlight guys that you see as up-and-comers, whether it be Bryan Danielson or Michael Hutter, Brodus Clay, whatever the case may be, whomever you think is, going to be your next heavyweight champion on Nitro or your world champion on ECW, you can use Tuesday Night Attitude as a proving ground to test out these new prospects, much like how ECW and then what would become NXT did happen to be the case. And that is this change one thing, change everything idea, is that with ECW never going away, or going away for such a short period of time for the invasion and then coming back full-fledged post-invasion, the one thing that changes is you have to figure out what goes on Tuesday nights 10 to 11 on the Sci-Fi Network, and that's where Tuesday Night Attitude comes into play, starting out as like a play to nostalgia for the Attitude Era, because when you go 5 years, 2001 to 2006, without the World Wrestling Federation, the Attitude Era, without what once was, that's when Vince will get that itch to go back and try and reclaim his magic and realize within short order that he can't put the genie back in the bottle. He can't make it happen again, and that's when you have to pivot and make the Tuesday show not NXT, just keep it called Tuesday Night Attitude, but then you, like I said, make it where you look for who's the next big breakout star. Total Nonstop Action Wrestling didn't even introduce their Winged Eagle title until 2007, while yes, Tuesday Night Attitude would be the debut of that classic TNA Winged Eagle title. It actually makes sense because with Monday Nitro using a version of the big gold belt and his ECW Hardcore TV using a modernized version of their classic championship, then of course Vince would want to bring in a belt that reminds him of his heyday, whether it be the 80s with Hogan, the 90s with Bret and Shawn, or even the late 90s, early 2000s with Stone Cold Steve Austin, and call back to the Attitude Era. So yeah, that's the way I see this Butterfly Effect fitting with the prior Butterfly Effect. I don't actually plan on making a lot or even any other Butterfly Effect wrestlings that go together, because the whole point of the change one thing, change everything is it's kind of a standalone concept and they're not playing out in the same world. But that revival of Extreme Championship Wrestling was always something that bothered me when in this world ECW doesn't die, it just transforms into what once was SmackDown. And so that was a lingering issue. But like I said, it was like a 5 years later kind of issue. So it gave me time to think it over, figure it out, and say, that's the answer. Does this purchase hurt professional wrestling? Definitely. But here's the thing. The Khan family could actually see it as motivation to get into the wrestling business sooner. Or how about this? Billy Corgan may see this as a reason to get into the wrestling business sooner. Two very financially wealthy people who inevitably do get into the wrestling business. Here's another thing. I don't think Jeff Jarrett's tenure with WCW Nitro will last very long. None of his Raw or Nitro tenures were very long during the Monday Night Wars, and so he could conceptually start Global Force Wrestling earlier with his dad. That's the funny thing about this idea of TNA being purchased. It doesn't mean that no wrestling can rise up and be a competitor. It just means that somebody has to want to be competition to the McMahon hierarchy, the dynasty of Connecticut, whatever way you want to look at it. Because I've long thought that if somebody wanted to make a deal with New Japan Pro Wrestling and launch New Era American Wrestling and work under the IWGP banner, wouldn't that be cool? They have great titles. Just use that governing body as your launching point to do North American Pro Wrestling or whatever instead of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And that's my point, is that just because TNA gets purchased in this timeline doesn't mean WWE would go without competition. It just has to come from some other place. Like I said, whether it's New Japan, AAA, the list goes on. But yeah, thanks for tuning in to this ridiculously pointless rant about what could have gone on at 10 to 11 o'clock on Sci-Fi Channel in the years of 2006 to whenever NXT went off the air. Well, yeah, appreciate it. Hope you had a good time. I did. Love the butterfly effect, changing one thing and changing everything.